Okay. If I may, I'd like to begin with a few words of my own about Professor Uriel Haidt. As I look back, this way. Okay. Is it better now? Okay. I'll bend over. I hope that the chairperson will not count my words on Professor Haidt within the 15 or 20 minutes that I'm allotted for this talk. As I look back, I can say that Professor Haidt was the one teacher that had the most impact upon my future professional life. He was the one who attracted me into the field of Ottoman and Turkish studies to begin with, and as it turned out, also had an enormous influence on the very subjects that I chose later for research. I attribute this not only to the subjects themselves, but also to the great impression he gave, the great inspiration he gave me as an accomplished scholar and teacher, and to his overwhelming personal charisma. Indeed, taking my case as an example, I think there is much to say about the kind of inspiration a teacher can have on the future of his students. Uriel Haidt was definitely one of those teachers. The subject I'm going to dwell on in the next few minutes is also one of, I would say, the legacy of what I had from Professor Uriel Haidt, because Professor Haidt was, as we all know, a scholar. He dealt a lot with the history of Ottoman Palestine. As a resident of Haifa in the north, I became interested in the history of our neighboring city of Acre. In the late Ottoman period, as we know, Acre fell somewhat under the shadow of my own city, Haifa, so I thought it would be a good idea to get to know Acre a little more and about the way it lived through that period of its history, the period I call the period of decline. Throughout its history, the port city of Acre on the Mediterranean coast of Palestine went through several ups and downs, and this was true also during the Ottoman period itself. When Acre came under Ottoman rule in 1516, it was no more than a small village placed as a nahiyeh within the district Sanjak of Safed. In the 18th century, however, thanks to the growing trade in cotton and grains with Europe, Acre became a flourishing port and trade center, attracting thousands of newcomers, both native and foreign, and became one of the largest cities in Syria, Palestine. This was well manifest in the period of Daher al-Omar, the famous Bedouin chief we all know, and his successor, in a way, Jezar Pasha, who not only came as a tax farmer, but also he was the governor of the very Eyalet of Saida, which he ruled, and he made Acre into his seat of government. Because of its economic and political importance, it was surrounded, Acre, with strong walls and fortifications, and became a key city for anyone seeking control over Palestine and beyond. Later on, and during the whole of the 19th century, Acre went through a long period of decline. It held its own during the time of the immediate successors of Jezar, Suleiman and Abdullah, in the first decades of the 19th century, but suffered enormously during the period of the Egyptian occupation, when it experienced two disastrous acts of siege in 1831 and 1840. Apart from the physical damage inflicted upon the city and its population, there was also a sharp decline in trade brought about from by a variety of reasons. This resulted in a significant drop in population, and Acre was the only city in Palestine which in the 19th century did not experience a rise in its population. At the end of the Ottoman period, about 9,000 or 10,000 people is against something like 20-odd thousand people in the 18th century, as estimates tell us. With the restoration of Ottoman rule in 1840, there came also a significant change in status, as Acre no longer served as a center of an eyalet or vilayet, but was relegated instead into being a center of a district, sanjak, a smaller unit within a larger province. First it was Saida, and then in the 60s, Syria, Damascus, Syria, and finally again Beirut in 1888. The loss of status as a seat of government probably served as yet another factor in the city's decline. So what I'd like to do today is to briefly point to a few factors which, in spite of the above, still helped, in my view, to preserve Acre's standing in the eyes of the Ottomans throughout this period. First, although Acre lost its position as a seat of government of an eyalet or vilayet, it did continue to serve as the seat of government and administration of a sanjak, retaining its control over the towns and sub-districts in the region, including the towns of Haifa, Safed, Tiberias, and Nazareth. Consequently, Acre could maintain its links with the whole northern part of Palestine, which it formerly held as the center of a proper eyalet or vilayet. Interestingly, many of the governors appointed as mutasarrifs of Acre during this period kept their old title of Pasha, higher than the normal title of Bey, which was held by mutasarrifs. One other important factor, apart from this set of factors, was naturally the city's military and strategic advantages. Situated on a small peninsula projecting into the Mediterranean, Acre was well protected by the sea from three directions and only accessible from the land from the east. This, combined with its man-made fortifications, enabled Acre to retain its former role as a coastal stronghold which could defend the territory, defend the country against any aggressive invasion from the sea. It is true that many of its fortifications had been destroyed, but when the Ottomans returned to Palestine in 1840, after the Egyptian occupation, they set out to reconstruct the old walls and fortifications and turn Acre into a main military base for the 5th Ottoman Army, with its headquarters in Damascus. Conforming to the new Tanzimat trend to separate between the civil service and the military structure, Acre now had a governor whose duties were wholly civil and responsible to the Vali and eventually to the civil authorities in Istanbul, side by side with the local commander, who was subject, of course, to his own military commanders. Acre did not, as we know, have to face the danger of invasion from the outside until World War I, but the threat was ever present in the mind of the Ottoman government. In the troublesome 19th century, the Ottomans could not rule out a further hostile attempt to seize control of the city and the region at large, or at least to make a show of force by deploying what was customary in the 19th century, threatening gunboats. Along with its military tasks, Acre played an important role in serving as both as a central prison for criminals or as a place of exile for political enemies. The same advantages which made the city a stronghold against possible invasion from the outside worked for it in making the city a safe location for keeping all kinds of undesirables within its walls. The difference between the two categories, criminals and prisoners, is clear. While criminals had to spend their terms inside prison walls for the duration of their sentences, the exiles were allowed to live in the city, lead their normal lives, and even receive financial support. These were mostly from among groups or individuals considered a threat to Ottoman sovereignty, to public order, or to the authority of the Sultan. They were subject to close supervision and could not leave town without permission. The Baha'is that we all know today are a good example for these exiles. With regards to Acre's economic situation, it is true yet another set of factors which I think is important. It is true that it suffered much from the effects of destruction in the previous period, from the decline of trade with Europe, from the limitations of a small port, and from other reasons. The port was not suited to modern, so-called modern shipping. The size of the ships was much greater than before, and so on. Yet we learn that transport and trade between Acre and the hinterland never really ceased. The whole region of the Bay of Acre was, after all, the only one in Palestine from which it was possible to cut through the inner mountainous area of the country on flat land towards the hinterland in the east, beyond the Jordan. Camel caravans carrying the grains of the Horan region continued to come all along to visit the markets of Acre, and the whole area had the potential for future development. A whole new phase began, of course, toward the end of the century, when a new railway line, the so-called Damascus-Acre line, was conceived. It was planned and designed with the goal of connecting the grain-rich Horan region and Damascus with the coast and facilitate communications with the hinterland generally. The concession was first given to a British company, but when the British failed to carry out the job, it was turned over to Sultan Abdul Hamid, who made it part of the well-known Hijazi project. Haifa was first chosen to be the terminus of the line on the coast, but a branch line to Acre was added in 1913. The project had an enormous effect on stimulating trade between the coast and the hinterland and make the whole northern part of the country a center of transport and communications. For the Ottomans, apart from its economic benefits, the railway enabled them to strengthen their hold over the eastern districts and Arabia, and enhanced the strategic importance of the whole area. One other factor, last factor, or set of factors, which accounted for the continued importance of Acre in the eyes of the Ottomans, was perhaps of a less tangible nature, but I strongly believe it carried much weight with the Ottoman government. Acre, after all, had a strong role to play in Islamic history, the Crusades, as well as in Ottoman history, Napoleon. Thanks to Jazar Pasha, It was also the site of a celebrated mosque built within its walls and the religious institutions surrounding it. Although small in size, its population in the 19th century had a large Muslim majority, something which presumably made the Ottomans feel more at home and secure in Acre than in any other place in the district. This overall Islamic character of the city and its population must have carried some further weight upon the Ottoman policies, and it made the Ottoman authorities sensitive to the desires of Acre's Muslim population. The main competition to Acre at the time came, as mentioned, from neighboring Haifa, which witnessed enormous demographic and economic development in the 19th century. Haifa enjoyed important advantages over Acre, with the space available, as I mentioned, for shipping, which enabled the handling of larger and modern passenger and cargo ships. As evident in the statistics, the number of passengers and the volume of trade, going through Haifa were steadily increasing in both absolute and relative terms. This reflected itself in the rapid growth of the commercial classes in Haifa, including many non-Muslims and foreigners. Even former residents of Acre were induced to move their businesses and homes to Haifa, and among them many of the foreign consuls. All this understandably caused much envy and frustration among the population of Acre. As we learn from letters and petitions addressed to the authorities by Acre residents, they pressed the government on such matters as the removal of restrictions upon construction and land purchase imposed by the army on building and construction in Acre, the expansion of the port facilities, and the extension of the railway from Damascus to Acre beyond Haifa. Though the authorities could not always satisfy these demands in full, their response seems to have been quite favorable. The restrictions on construction were relaxed towards the end of the period, allocations were made for the development of the port, and Acre got the extension it wanted for the railway. The army must have added its own support and even pressure towards meeting the residents' demands, because it was basically in its interest. A very interesting group, and I'm concluding, I hope not too late, a very important, interesting group of documents found in the Bashbakalik archive tells us of an initiative taken in 1884 to move the capital of the district, the Sanjak, from Acre to Haifa, and the simultaneous moving of the center of the sub-district from Haifa to Acre. It was approved by the Administrative Council, the Majlis Edirne, of the Vilayet of Syria, on the ground of the difficult housing conditions in Acre, the growing amount of official business required in Haifa, etc., other reasons. Needless to say, it was met by a strong protest from the residents of Acre, who listed all the arguments they could find, geographical, historical, financial, and others, to keep things as they were. In this they were successful, for the initiative was indeed rejected, as were similar moves made later to move the capital of the district. Acre remained the capital of the district until the last day of Ottoman rule. Thank you.